Welcome. Tonight's story takes us into a quiet household where a single decision changed everything. A man believed he was buying help, safety, and obedience when he purchased an enslaved woman to care for his young daughter. But what unfolded in the darkness of that very first night shocked everyone who lived under that roof and left a question history still struggles to answer. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you value deeply researched, true historical stories that take countless hours to uncover and verify, make sure you subscribe so you never miss what others try to forget. The household stood as a symbol of absolute control, where every wall, every locked door, and every whispered command reinforced who held power and who did not. From the outside, it appeared orderly and respectable, but beneath that surface lived a rigid hierarchy enforced through fear. Decisions were not discussed, they were obeyed. Human lives were measured by usefulness, not humanity, and compassion was seen as weakness rather than virtue. At the top of this structure was the master, a man accustomed to being listened to without question. His authority extended beyond property and land. It reached into the bodies, time, and futures of those he owned. He believed control was proof of intelligence and dominance, and any challenge, spoken or silent, was treated as a threat. In his world, order was maintained not by justice, but by punishment. The enslaved people within the home lived under constant surveillance. Every movement was noticed, every mistake remembered. Even silence could be dangerous, interpreted as defiance or plotting. They learned to lower their eyes, soften their steps, and hide their thoughts deep within themselves. Survival depended on reading moods, predicting tempers, and knowing when to disappear into the background. Women in this household carried a particular burden. They were expected to serve tirelessly, while remaining invisible, nurturing children who would one day inherit the power used against them. Their bodies were not their own, and their emotions were considered irrelevant. Any act of care was demanded, never appreciated, and any resistance, no matter how small, was met with severe consequences. The child of the house grew up absorbing this imbalance of power, without fully understanding it. She was surrounded by obedience and taught that it was natural, even deserved. The suffering that supported her comfort was hidden behind closed doors and careful routines, making cruelty appear normal and kindness feel unnecessary. This environment created a fragile illusion of stability. On the surface, everything functioned smoothly, but beneath it simmered exhaustion, resentment, and unspoken fear. The household relied on silence to survive, silence from those who suffered and silence from those who benefited. It was a system that could endure for years, as long as no one disrupted it. But history has shown that systems built entirely on control are never truly secure. All it takes is one moment, one choice, or one night for the balance to shift. And within this tightly controlled household, the arrival of a new enslaved woman would soon expose just how thin the line was between order and chaos. The child at the center of the story was young, fragile, and deeply unaware of the forces shaping her life. She moved through the house freely, shielded by comfort and care, never questioning why every need was met instantly or why certain faces always lowered their eyes when she entered the room. To her, the household felt safe, predictable and unchanging. She had been raised to expect constant attention, yet much of that attention came from people who were never allowed to speak freely around her. She noticed their presence, but not their pain. The quiet hands that dressed her, fed her, and cleaned her toys belonged to individuals whose own lives were tightly controlled. But to her, they were simply part of the background of daily life. Her health was a growing concern for the household. She suffered from sudden fevers, restless nights, and unexplained crying that left her exhausted and frightened. Doctors were summoned, remedies were tried, and prayers were whispered, yet nothing seemed to bring lasting relief. Each sleepless night deepened the household's anxiety and desperation. Because she was the master's daughter, her well-being carried enormous weight. Her suffering was not just a family issue. It was seen as a disruption of order, a threat to the stability of the home. The master demanded solutions, believing that with enough effort or money, the problem could be fixed. Despite the attention she received, the child often felt alone. Nights were the hardest. Shadows on the walls frightened her, and unfamiliar sounds stirred her fears. She clung to the adults around her, searching for comfort, not realizing how little control they had over their own lives. There were moments when she sensed kindness that felt different, gentler, quieter, more sincere. These moments came from those who were not allowed to show affection openly, yet offered it in subtle ways: a soft touch, a calming hum, a patient presence. These gestures, though small, left deep impressions on her. It was this vulnerability, this mixture of fear and innocence, that made the master seek a solution outside his household. He believed that by purchasing another enslaved woman, he could restore peace and health to his daughter's life, never imagining that this decision would set into motion events no one could control. The decision to purchase another enslaved woman was not made out of compassion, but out of frustration and control. The master viewed the problem as a failure of labor rather than a human crisis. If his daughter continued to suffer, it meant someone was not doing their job well enough. In his mind, the solution was simple: acquire someone new, someone he believed could fix what others could not. He justified the purchase by framing it as necessity. The household already relied on enslaved labor for every function, and adding one more person felt no different than replacing a worn tool. He convinced himself that bringing in a fresh caretaker would restore order, calm the child, and allow the household to return to its rigid routine. The woman he sought had to meet specific expectations. She needed to be calm, obedient, and experienced with children. Strength was valued, but silence was valued more. He was less concerned with her past or her family than with her ability to serve without question. Her humanity was irrelevant to the transaction. The market where he made the purchase was loud, crowded, and cruel. Human lives were displayed, inspected, and priced openly. Buyers examined bodies for signs of weakness, while sellers spoke of people as though they were livestock. The woman chosen stood quietly, aware that resistance would only make things worse. When the exchange was complete, no ceremony followed, only possession. She was given no time to understand where she was going or what was expected of her. Her future was decided with the exchange of money, sealing her fate in a household she had never seen. During the journey to the house, she remained silent, observing every detail. She memorized paths, listened to voices, and studied expressions. Experience had taught her that knowledge was a form of protection, even in captivity. Every new place came with new dangers. By the time she arrived, the household saw her only as a solution to a problem. No one asked what she had lost or what she feared. She was there to serve a purpose, and that purpose, they believed, would begin the very first night. She arrived at the house quietly, carrying nothing but the clothes she wore and the weight of everything she had been forced to leave behind. The doors closed behind her with a final sound that needed no explanation. From that moment, she understood she was being watched, measured, and judged before she had spoken a single word. The household studied her closely. Eyes followed her movements, noting her posture, her expression, the way she responded to commands. Silence was interpreted as obedience, but also as mystery. Some saw her as a solution, others as a potential problem. No one saw her as a person adjusting to a new captivity. Her first sight of the child revealed more than she expected. The girl looked smaller than she imagined, fragile and pale, with eyes that carried fear rather than arrogance. The woman recognized that look instantly. It was the look of someone who did not feel safe, even in their own bed. This recognition stirred something deep and dangerous inside her. The master explained her duties briefly and without emotion. Care for the child. Obey orders. 'Cause no trouble. His tone made it clear that failure would not be tolerated. There were no questions allowed, no room for misunderstanding. Her role had been defined before she even crossed the threshold. Other enslaved people in the house kept their distance at first. They had learned that new arrivals often attracted attention, and attention could bring punishment. Yet in stolen glances and subtle gestures, they tried to warn her. This house was strict, and mistakes were rarely forgiven. Despite the tension, she remained composed. Her face revealed nothing, but her mind was active. She observed the rhythms of the house, the way voices changed when the master entered, the places where shadows lingered longest. These details mattered. They always did. As night approached, the atmosphere shifted. The child would soon need her care, and expectations pressed heavily on her shoulders. The household believed this was simply the beginning of routine service. None of them realized that first impressions can hide intentions, and that the quietest presence can carry the most power. From the moment she entered the household, an unspoken tension settled into every corner of the home. It was not announced, yet everyone felt it. Conversations became shorter, movements more careful, as if the air itself were listening. The presence of someone new always disrupted the fragile balance, especially someone brought in to solve a problem that others had failed to fix. The master watched closely, searching for signs of reassurance or doubt. He expected immediate results, a visible change that would confirm his decision was right. His impatience hung heavily over the house, turning simple tasks into silent tests. Any mistake, no matter how small, risked becoming proof of failure. The enslaved woman sensed this pressure instantly. She understood that she was not merely being asked to care for a child, but to carry the hopes and frustrations of the entire household. If the girl cried, it would be her fault. If the night went badly, the blame would fall on her. This knowledge sharpened her awareness and tightened her silence. Other enslaved people felt the tension differently. Some feared that her arrival meant harsher expectations for everyone. Others worried that if she succeeded, their own suffering would be ignored even more. Quiet resentment mixed with cautious hope, creating an emotional divide that no one dared to voice. The child, though young, sensed the shift as well. She clung more tightly to familiar faces, unsure whether this new presence meant comfort or danger. Her unease fed the household's anxiety, reinforcing the belief that something was not right, even if no one could explain what. As evening approached, the house grew unnaturally quiet. Footsteps echoed louder than usual, and doors closed with deliberate care. Dinner passed with minimal conversation, each person lost in private thought. Everyone was waiting for calm, for disaster, for something to confirm their fears or ease them. That silence was the most telling sign of all. It was the sound of people bracing themselves, of a system stretched thin by control and expectation. And within that silence, the stage was set for a night that would break the unspoken rules the household depended on. As night fell, unease crept through the house like a slow shadow. Lamps were lit, curtains drawn, and doors secured, yet no one felt settled. The usual nighttime routine felt heavier, as if every action carried consequences that had not yet revealed themselves. The stillness outside only amplified the tension within. The child was prepared for bed earlier than usual. Her breathing was shallow, her hands restless as she clutched the blankets. She looked toward the doorway repeatedly, unsure of who would enter next. Fear, though unspoken, filled the room. Nights had become something to endure rather than rest within. The enslaved woman was brought to the child's room with quiet instructions and watchful eyes. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. She moved carefully, aware that every step was being measured. Even the way she stood beside the bed felt like a test she could not afford to fail. Outside the room, the household lingered in silence. Some pretended to busy themselves with small tasks, while others simply waited, listening for any sound that might signal success or disaster. The master remained alert, confident yet tense, believing control would see him through another night. Inside the room, the atmosphere felt different. The woman noticed details others had missed: the child's trembling, the way fear tightened her voice, the rhythm of her breathing when she tried to calm herself. These signs told a story that no doctor had heard and no authority had considered. Time seemed to slow as the night deepened. Each passing moment stretched, filled with anticipation and dread. The house itself felt like it was holding its breath, suspended between expectation and uncertainty. It was in this fragile space, under the cover of darkness and silence, that choices would soon be made. Choices shaped not by orders or fear alone, but by instincts forged through suffering. And whatever happened next would shatter the illusion that this night would be like any other. The silence of the night was suddenly interrupted by sounds no one expected. At first, it was faint, barely more than a shift in the air, but sharp enough to make those listening freeze in place. A soft cry, then a pause, followed by something unfamiliar that did not belong to the usual rhythm of the house. Every sound seemed louder because no one dared to speak. Outside the child's room, Footsteps stopped mid-step. Someone held their breath, another pressed an ear closer to the door. The master straightened, his confidence wavering as uncertainty crept in. These were not the sounds of routine care. They carried an edge that suggested something was changing beyond his control. Inside the room, the sounds took on a different meaning. A low voice broke the quiet, not harsh, not commanding, but steady and deliberate. It was followed by a movement that shifted the atmosphere, as if the room itself had softened. The child's cries changed, losing their sharpness, becoming confused, then hesitant. Moments later, there was a sudden stillness. No crying, no movement. That silence was far more frightening than noise. Those waiting outside exchanged glances filled with alarm. In a house where control was everything, silence meant something had gone wrong, or something entirely unexpected had taken place. The master's mind raced with possibilities. Had the child grown worse? Had the woman failed already? Or had she dared to do something she was not permitted to do? His authority, usually unquestioned, felt distant in that moment, challenged by what he could not see or hear clearly. From within the room came a sound that none of them anticipated. A calm, even breathing that did not belong to the night's usual struggle. It was the sound of rest, the kind that had been absent from the household for far too long. This only deepened the confusion, because it defied every expectation they held. Those sounds, both the ones that came and the ones that disappeared, marked a turning point. They hinted that whatever was happening behind that closed door was not simple obedience or routine care. It was something deliberate, something powerful enough to quiet fear itself, and it was already beginning to unsettle everyone who heard it. In that moment of deep stillness, the enslaved woman made a decision that had been forming long before she ever entered this house. It was not sudden or reckless, but shaped by years of observing cruelty, fear, and fragile lives caught between them. She understood the danger of choice in a place where obedience was demanded, yet she also knew that doing nothing carried its own consequences. She moved with careful intention, guided not by orders, but by instinct and experience. Her actions were quiet, almost invisible, designed to avoid drawing attention while changing what truly mattered. Every motion was measured, every pause deliberate, as though she were weighing risk against necessity with each breath. The child sensed the shift immediately. What had once felt frightening now felt different, safer, calmer, unfamiliar in a way that did not hurt. The woman did not rush or force comfort. Instead, she allowed it to arrive naturally, offering reassurance without words, presence without control. Outside the room, the household remained unaware of the exact choice being made. They could only feel that something had changed, that the night was not unfolding as expected. The master's authority meant nothing behind that closed door, where power took a quieter, more human form. The woman knew that if discovered, her actions could be punished severely. Yet she accepted this risk with a calm resolve. For her, survival had always meant navigating danger with wisdom rather than fear. This choice was no different. It was simply more visible in its potential consequences. Time passed, marked only by the steady rhythm of breathing in the room. The house waited, tense and uncertain, while the night moved forward unaware of the silent defiance taking place within its walls. That decision, made in darkness and silence, would not remain hidden for long. Whether it was seen as mercy, rebellion, or something far more threatening depended on who discovered it first. But by then, the course of the night, and the household itself, had already been altered. The discovery came not with shouting or chaos, but with a stunned stillness that spread through the room. When the door was finally opened, the master stepped inside expecting either failure or disorder. Instead, he was confronted with a scene that made him stop short, his certainty dissolving into confusion. The child lay peacefully, her face relaxed in a way no one in the household had seen for months. Her breathing was slow and even, untouched by fear or pain. For a brief moment, the master questioned his own senses, wondering if exhaustion had distorted his perception. This was not how nights usually ended. His eyes moved to the enslaved woman. She stood calmly nearby, neither defensive nor apologetic. There was no sign of panic in her posture, no visible evidence of wrongdoing. That composure unsettled him more than any obvious mistake could have. Questions formed in his mind, but none came out at first. He searched the room for signs of disobedience, something out of place, something to justify anger. Yet everything appeared orderly. The only difference was the child herself, finally at rest. Other members of the household gathered quietly at the doorway. Whispers died before they could fully form. Some felt relief, others suspicion. No one understood how this result had been achieved, and that uncertainty bred fear rather than comfort. The master's authority felt strangely weakened in that moment. He had demanded control, expected obedience, and yet the outcome he desired had arrived through means he did not command or understand. This realization struck at the core of his power. That discovery marked a turning point. The night had not ended in failure or triumph, but in something far more dangerous, proof that control could be bypassed, that obedience was not the only path to order. And once that truth was seen, it could never be unseen. The reaction inside the household was immediate but restrained, shaped by fear rather than relief. No one spoke openly, yet faces revealed everything. Wide eyes, stiff posture, uneasy glances exchanged in silence. What they had just witnessed did not fit into the rules they lived by, and that made it dangerous. Some felt a quiet sense of awe. They had watched the child suffer night after night, and now she slept peacefully, something prayers and punishment had failed to achieve. For them, the moment felt almost unreal, as if the house itself had briefly stepped outside its cruel logic. But even this hope was wrapped tightly in caution. Others reacted with suspicion. They wondered what had been done, and whether it crossed lines that should never be crossed. In a system built on obedience, unexplained success was more frightening than failure. If the enslaved woman could bring peace without force or command, then the system itself looked weak. The master's mood infected everyone around him. Though he did not explode in anger, his silence was sharp and unsettling. He asked short, controlled questions, watching closely for hesitation or defiance. Each word carried the weight of potential punishment, reminding everyone who still held power. The enslaved woman answered only what was asked, her voice steady, her eyes lowered. She gave nothing extra, no explanation, no defense. This restraint confused the household further. They expected fear or gratitude, not calm certainty. Among the enslaved people, the reaction was deeply divided. Some felt a surge of hope they barely dared to acknowledge, while others feared retaliation that might follow. They had learned that moments of calm were often followed by cruelty meant to reassert control. By the time the night settled again, the household had changed in ways no one could fully name. Trust had not been built, but doubt had been planted. And in a place ruled by absolute power, doubt was the most unsettling reaction of all. The consequences began quietly, like a small crack appearing in a wall that everyone pretended not to see. At first, nothing seemed to change until the master's frustration returned, sharper than before. He couldn't accept that the child had slept peacefully without his direct control or the usual methods of authority. That realization gnawed at him, feeding a growing need to reassert dominance. The next morning, the atmosphere shifted. The master spoke more curtly, watched more closely, and demanded more than before. His eyes lingered on the enslaved woman in a way that made everyone uncomfortable. She was no longer just a servant, she was a reminder that his control might not be absolute. The child's improvement also created a strange tension. While her calmness brought relief, it also highlighted the cruelty that had existed before. People began to question, quietly, privately, why the child had suffered so long, and why her comfort had depended on someone else's hidden actions. The household was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that their routines had caused harm. As the master's anger grew, so did his need to prove he still held power. He began to increase demands, testing boundaries with stricter rules and harsher expectations. This behavior was not about discipline. It was about regaining control over a situation that had slipped from his grasp. The enslaved woman felt the change immediately. She understood the danger of her success and the growing hostility it created. Her actions had not only brought peace to the child, but had also exposed the fragility of the master's authority. She now had to move even more carefully, aware that any mistake could become a pretext for punishment. Other members of the household became more cautious around her, unsure whether to support or distance themselves. Fear of retribution overpowered any sense of gratitude. People began to avoid eye contact, and conversations became even more guarded. The house became a place of tension, not peace. The most lasting consequence was the shift in the household's understanding of control. They realized that the system they depended on could be challenged, not openly, but quietly. That knowledge spread like a dangerous seed, growing in the minds of those who had suffered the longest. And once it took root, it changed everything, even if no one could say so aloud. The most haunting question that lingered after that night was not whether the enslaved woman had done something wrong, but what she had truly done, and why. The household could not explain how the child's fear had vanished so completely, and that uncertainty unsettled them more than any obvious act of defiance. The lack of a clear answer left room for suspicion, rumors, and fear to grow. People began to imagine possibilities that fit their own fears. Some whispered that the woman had used dark magic or poison, while others believed she had somehow manipulated the child's mind. The imagination of a frightened household turned the unknown into something monstrous, because it was easier to fear a myth than to face the truth that control had failed. The master's silence grew heavier, as if the unanswered question sat like a stone in his chest. He could not accept that the child's comfort had been achieved without his intervention. His pride and sense of authority had been challenged, and he could not bear the thought that his household had been altered by someone he did not fully understand. Even years later, the memory of that night remained. It was retold in hushed tones, with each retelling adding new details, new fears, and new interpretations. The story became a warning, proof that even within the strictest systems, there were moments that could not be controlled, and people who could not be fully owned. For the child, the memory was different. She remembered the first night of calm as a moment of safety she had never known before. It was not fear she felt, but relief, and a sense of gratitude she couldn't explain. Yet even that gratitude was complicated, because it was tied to a secret that no one would openly speak about, and for the enslaved woman, the question of why remained the most personal and painful of all. Whether she had acted out of mercy, revenge, or survival, the consequences of that night followed her. She carried the memory of the child's relief, but also the knowledge that her actions had shaken a world built on control. In the end, the night did not just change the household, it changed the story of power itself, reminding everyone that even the strongest systems can be broken by a single, quiet act.